So we're going to start this series entitled The Path this morning. I took the title from the book written by Andy Stanley called The Principle of the Path, How to Get to Where You Are from where you to where you want to be. So my messages are going to come from the book of Proverbs. And maybe before we jump into the book of Proverbs, we should just do a little background, a little deep dive on it. The book of Proverbs is part of a series of books, Psalms, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon. Scholars call these the wisdom literature. It was written by Solomon, at least the first 24 chapters. But you might say to me, what does wisdom literature mean? Well, if you have intelligence, usually that means you have a lot of information and know how to do certain things in certain situations. Wisdom, however, means that you know more than just the information. You know more than just the how. You know the what. You know what things you should do, what course you should take in each of those circumstances. In other words, as my father used to always say, you can be smart without being wise. I believe wisdom literature is included in Scripture so that we can become more wise, to help us to know what to do in specific circumstances more than just how to do it. As I mentioned, the book is primarily written by Solomon, who was considered to be one of the wisest kings. In fact, 1 Kings 4, 32 and 34 talks about Solomon and says he spoke 3,000 proverbs and his songs numbered 1,005. He also spoke about animals and birds, reptiles and fish. People came from all nations to listen to Solomon's wisdom, sent by all the kings of the world who had heard of his wisdom. If Solomon were alive today, he would likely have a master's PhD in literature and probably maybe philosophy and zoology and ornithology and herpetology and ichthyology and probably a lot of other ologies that I didn't bother to look up. He died in 931 BC and wrote all of the Song of Solomon and all of Ecclesiastes before he died. However, he had only written the first 24 chapters or what we call chapters now, of these Proverbs. Chapters 25 through 29 were added some 200 years later after he died during the time of King Hezekiah. And we know that because Proverbs 25:1 says, these were the Proverbs of Solomon compiled by the men of Hezekiah, king of Judah. So we know that they were the ones that actually wrote it down. Chapter 30 was written by someone named Agur of Jakah. And chapter 31 was written by King Lemuel. We don't really know much about either one of those guys, and it really doesn't matter except to say that they obviously were very wise and had very wise things to say. All right, that's probably enough deep dive into the book of Proverbs for us. Let's get into, we're not going to start at the very beginning because there's a lot of prologue stuff, but let's jump into chapter 7. Here's what I know about stuff. If you read the scriptures, it's very clear. The road you're on determines where you are going to end up. I mean, that's true. We know that to be true. If I go out here to Route 86 and head north, eventually I'm going to wind up in Virginia. If I go far enough south on 95, I'm going to wind up in South Carolina. Whatever road, whatever highway, whatever path I'm on will determine where I'm going to end up. Now, I may want to go someplace else. I can pack my beach towel, my sunscreen, and my Speedo with every hope that I can spend a week at Virginia Beach. But if I keep going south, I'm going to end up in South Carolina, not Virginia. Right? We all know that. So here's the first principle of the path. Your direction and not your intention determines your destination. That may seem obvious in the world of geography, but when it comes to the rest of our lives, whether it be family or finances or marriage or dating or the way we raise our kids or our health, the same principle still applies. In every area of our life, it is our direction, not our intention, that determines our destination. Well, you may say that makes sense. Yet how many times have you been in conversation with someone who's describing how their life got shipwrecked, how their marriage blew up, how their kids grew up rebellious and resentful? How many times have you talked to students who didn't get the grades they were hoping for so they could get into the college they wanted, or didn't have the grades so that they could make the sports team or the drama group they wanted to be part of? And as they're describing what led up to their failure, you're thinking to yourself, well, duh, how did you not see that coming? Let me take this principle one step further. When we understand that our direction determines our destination, we find that each part of our life on earth, that no matter what we do, that direction will trump and overcome over everything else that we have going for us except for God. You can have the best of intentions and end up in the worst of situations. And that can happen to you even if you are the smartest person on the planet, even if you're the best looking or the biggest or the strongest. The principle is true no matter how strong-willed you are, no matter how pleasant you are, no matter how much your mama loves you. In every area of your life, your direction, not your intentions, not your strengths, not your weaknesses, not your hopes, not your dreams, not your plans, nothing. Your direction alone will determine your destination. So let's look at this scripture and see where we get this principle from. Solomon is about to tell us a story. I don't know whether it's a true story or one that he made up to demonstrate this principle. But basically, he tells the story this way. I'm standing at the window of my house, and I look out through the lattice. I saw among the simple, I noticed among the young men, a youth who lacked judgment. Well, just by that characterization, we know something is coming. He continues, he was going down the street near her corner, walking along in the direction of her house at twilight as the day was fading and the dark of night set in. Now, you don't have to be a biblical scholar, you don't have to be a theologian to see where this story is heading, do you? A young guy cruising the streets at sunset, heading, it would seem intentionally, in the direction of some specific woman's home. As we'll see in just a moment, he knew who the woman was, he knew that she was married, and apparently he knew that her husband was going to be out of town, and that she would even be out prowling the street corner looking for, well, just looking. That alone should have stopped him in his tracks, but it didn't. In fact, if you read this story, it's clear that's the very reason he was heading in her direction. I think if we were able to get inside this kid's head and tap into the soundtrack that might be going through his mind, I don't know if you're like me, I always have music going through my mind when I'm doing stuff. We probably would have heard, I'm kind of classic rock guy, so my head would be Born to Be Wild, maybe, you know. But whatever, he's confident that this is going to be a night for him to remember. Maybe one that he can even brag about to his friends the next day. Meanwhile, back at the window, Solomon is watching this guy. And there's a soundtrack playing in his head as well. Probably the theme song from the movie Jaws. You know, da-dum, da-dum. Why would that be? Because there's a marked contrast, because what this kid is expecting to experience and what Solomon is certain is going to happen to him in the future. Solomon is older and wiser, and he understands from his experience where the path this younger, less experienced, and not so wise kid is going to go. The adolescent was preoccupied with what he believed would be an exciting event. A night of passion, a night disconnected from every other event in his life. But Solomon knows better. This night was not going to be an isolated event disconnected from everything else. It was a step, an intentional step down a particular path. A path, like all paths, that leads somewhere. This particular path had a predictable destination. And you don't need to be the wisest man in the world. You don't need to have the wisdom of Solomon to know what that is. You can predict the outcome of this encounter with nothing to draw on but your own experience or the experience of someone you know. Funny how that works. What's so obvious to those who are watching us often escapes us. Isn't that true? All right, let's continue with the story. Then out came a woman to meet him, dressed like a prostitute and with crafty intent. And then Solomon kind of sticks us in. She is loud and defiant. Her feet never stay at home. Now in the street, now at the squares. At every corner she lurks. Have you heard a different soundtrack in your head right now? Maybe Beethoven's Ninth Symphony? Dun, 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 dun. All right, anyway, let's go on. She took hold of him and kissed him, and with a brazen face she said, I have fellowship offerings at home. Today I have fulfilled my vows. So I came out to meet you. I looked for you, and I have found you. What this woman is saying to him is, I have fellowship offerings at home. I'm not a loose woman. I'm not someone who is a professional at this. I have plenty of money home. I'm not after your money. I'm after you. She was also implying that she had been to the temple and had everything squared away with God. She had already taken her sin bucket, if you will, and dumped it at the altar. And so she was ready to fill it up again with him. And the young guy is thinking, boy, if my friends could see me now. And I'm sure the soundtrack of Born to Be Wild is pumped up loud in his head. He's probably pinching himself to make sure it's not a dream. I think even if Solomon had called down from the window at that very moment to warn him, the kid would not have heard a single word that he said, because he would have been focused on the seductive words that this woman was saying to him. Let's continue. She says, I have covered my bed with colored linens from Egypt. I have perfumed my body with myrrh, aloes, and cinnamon. Come, let's drink deep of love till morning. Let's enjoy ourselves with love. Now, if you're under 30, you probably are saying to yourself, wow. And if you're over 30, you're going, whoa. And just in case he's not sure, she says, oh yes, by the way, my husband is not at home. He's gone on a long journey. He took his purse filled with money, and he will not be home until the full moon. Well, that pretty much clinches it right there. Not only did he not have to worry about her husband catching them, but he could hang around for breakfast. He could watch a little TV. Heck, he could spend the entire weekend. From his perspective, this is just getting better and better all the time. But Solomon saw this situation in an entirely different light. Look at what he says. With persuasive words, she led him astray. She seduced him with her smooth talk. All at once, he followed her like an ox going to the slaughter. I'm sorry, what? An ox headed where? We want to go, Solomon, wait a minute, you're getting this all wrong. This kid is going to be treated like a celebrity on the red carpet at an award show. Not like an ox going to a slaughter. Certainly doesn't look that way to the casual observer, and it most certainly didn't look that way to the young man. However, Solomon's not finished. He says, not only is he like an ox going to the slaughter, he's like a deer stepping into a noose till an arrow pierces his liver, like a bird darting into a snare, little knowing that it will cost him his life. Now, in case you didn't get the ox going to the slaughter picture well enough, Solomon says, picture a deer stepping into a noose, unable to move, and arrows being shot at him to kill him. Or a bird being trapped in a snare, thinking that he was going to get some wonderful treat when in fact it was going to cost him his life. From his vantage point, Solomon knows this young man, by his very action tonight, is throwing away his entire future, probably throwing away his life. Of course, the young man was not able to read Solomon's mind, and if he could, he would have shouted back, man, you sound just like my father. What does an old man know about love and passion anyway? This isn't just a date, it's a once-in-a-lifetime event. I'm not an ox, I'm not a deer, I'm a bird. I'm a passionate and vibrant young man. Mind your own business, busybody. Now, at this point in the narrative, of course, Solomon turns a corner and he starts addressing the broader audience that he's telling the story to. In other words, the next part of this is for you and me. Here's what he says. Okay. There we go. Sorry about that. My screen blanked out for me. Hang on. Be right there. All right, here we go. He says, now then, my sons, listen to me. Pay attention to what I say. Do not let your heart turn to her ways or stray into her paths. Many are the victims she has brought down. Her slain are a mighty throng. There's our word, paths. This is a path, Solomon says. This is a road that leads somewhere. It's not just a solitary, isolated step of an isolated event. And he says to the crowd listening that many are her victims. Not a few, not one or two, many, he says. Solomon debunks the notion that there was anything unique about what this kid was about to experience. It may have been unique for him, but the experience represents a well-worn path, a path that he says leads to death. A path that, despite what this naive kid had wanted to argue, was going to be his downfall. If Solomon could have called a timeout in the story and gotten the kid's undivided attention, he might have said something along the lines of, hey buddy, I hate to break it to you, but there's nothing special in what's going on here. There's nothing rare about this. You may have never felt this way before, but a lot of other people have. And if they were here to tell you their stories, you would think twice, because you're not special. You're part of a crowd. You're part of a herd. You're part of a flock. There's nothing new here. And the outcome for what you are about to do is all too predictable. She has done more than just capture your imagination. She is writing a script for your future. You are, in fact, a dead man walking. And to drive home his point, Solomon says, her house is a highway to the grave, leading down to the chambers of death. Yep, a highway. A 5-lane freeway with an express lane on the inside. There's nothing new about this, nothing unique. Just another young man who has chosen a path that will take him precisely to where he doesn't want to be. There was a disconnect. The disconnect in Solomon's scenario is easy, at least for us, to see. A young man who wants his life to be relationally richer chooses a path that ultimately will undermine all of his relationships. A young man who yearns for something good chooses a path that will ultimately lead to something bad. A youth who is striving to prove his independence and freedom will choose a path that has the potential to make him a captive and dependent. There was a disconnect, and Solomon could see that from afar, even his window. I've seen similar disconnects from my imaginary window as well, as I'm guessing you have too. Human beings, you see, have a propensity for choosing paths that lead us where we don't want to go. In the next few weeks, I'll give you my take on what causes this apparent lapse in reason, but for now, let's focus on how this dynamic plays out in our world. Maybe you have heard these before. A single woman who says, I want to meet and one day marry a great Christian guy who's got his act together, but then she'll date whoever asks her out as long as he's cute. A single guy who says, I want to marry a virgin, but he becomes sexually involved with every other girl that he ever dates, ruining them for their potential mates. A married woman who says, I want to have a good relationship with my husband, but makes her children the priority over him. A husband who says, I want my kids to respect me as they grow up, and then openly flirts with other women in the neighborhood. A young Christian who says, I want to develop a relationship with God, and I want to make him the most important thing in my life. But when he gets up in the morning, the first thing he does is go to Facebook and read up everybody's updates. A working man who says, I want to grow old and invest the latter years of my life with my grandchildren, but then neglects his health all along the way. An overweight guy who says, I want to get thin and lose weight, and oh yes, supersize that combo. A couple who says, we'd like our children to develop a real sense of morality and decency and choose friends who've done the same, but they don't go to church. Every weekend they head to something, or sleep in, or watch football, and they make excuses as to why there's no significant spiritual component to their life. Newlyweds who determine to be financially secure by the time they reach their parents' age, and then they adopt a lifestyle that can only be sustained by heavy debt and leveraged assets. A high school freshman who intends to graduate with a GPA that will afford him options as he selects a college, but then would rather go out and party than to spend extra time in study. The list could go on and on. Notice that the people on that list have legitimate goals. They often have very good intentions of reaching those goals. But like the naive young man in Solomon's story, the paths they choose eventually bring them to a destination that is entirely different from the one they intended. I got to tell you, this isn't rocket science. We shouldn't need someone to connect the dots for us. If your goal is to drop 2 sizes, you don't need to eat lunch at a donut shop. Amen, as Dr. Greg likes to say. If your goal is to get in great shape, you don't spend all day on the couch binge watching Netflix and snacking on every snack you can get your hands on. Those aren't pastimes, folks. Those are pathways. They lead somewhere. As I've already said, it's much easier to see those dynamics at work in other people's lives than it is in ourselves. In fact, right now, you're probably thinking about several people you wish were watching this message right now so they could hear what I'm talking about, because you've been telling them that for the last 20 years and they haven't listened to you. Well, before you start putting names and faces together in your mind, take a minute and think about your own life, and let me ask you this. Are there disconnects in your life? Are there discrepancies between what you desire in your heart and what you are doing with your life? Is there an alignment between your intentions and your direction? If you've ever gotten lost while driving, testify. You know that if you backtrack far enough, you can usually get your bearings and be on the right path or the right way. Now, worst case scenario means that if you backtrack, you probably cost yourself minutes, maybe even a couple of hours. You can do that when you're driving. You can't do that when you're lost in life. If you are on the wrong path and lost in life, you simply can't backtrack. When you get lost in life, you can't waste minutes or hours going backwards. You can waste an entire season of your life trying to do it. Choosing the wrong path in life will not just cost you a few minutes, it will cost you years. And nobody wants that. Nobody wants to wake up one day where we are in the 60s and wish we had taken a different path in our 30s. Nobody wants to arrive at the end of the marriage and wish they had taken a different path during the dating years. Think about it. You only get to be 20 once. You only get to have one senior year. Sometimes you only get one marriage. The path we choose at those critical junctions doesn't just determine our destination for that year, it determines our destination for the rest of our lives. The principle of the path is operating in your life every minute of every day. You are currently on some kind of financial path. You are currently on some kind of relational path. You are currently on some kind of moral, ethical path or an entertainment path. And each of those paths has their own destination. Which raises the question again, why would a guy like the one in Solomon's story walk down that path? How come he doesn't see where it leads? The answer? He doesn't think it's a path. He thinks it's an event, a one-time occurrence. The truth is, God says your life and your destination aren't about the things that are immediate. They are about the things that are ultimate. You can't trump the principle of the path with simply good intentions, because your direction, not your intentions, determines your destination. Some of you have been brokenhearted at various times in your life. You've wanted to know, why did God let this happen to me? Most of the time, the answer to that question is, He didn't. He wanted to stop it, but He couldn't stop you. That leads to 2 questions that I need to ask you this morning. What direction are you headed in? What direction morally? What direction relationally, with your family, with your friends, with the people that you interact with on a regular basis? What direction financially? Because those are the biggie things. I could probe into many more areas, but understand this. I can't answer those questions for you. Only you can answer them. You probably do want to assess your direction in other things too, maybe career-wise, maybe family-wise, but I encourage you to take some time before you go to bed tonight to think about this, to be honest with yourself. And that's a very hard thing to do. I understand that. But you need to do that to know what direction you are headed in. Here's the second question that I want to ask you. How do you know how to learn to choose the right path? Now, over the next several weeks, I hope to give you lots more help in answering this question. But for this morning, let me suggest just 3 things. First, get wisdom. That's what we're going to do for the next several weeks. We're going to get wisdom from Solomon, wisdom from the book of Proverbs. Reading Proverbs, I believe, will increase your wisdom quotient. There are 31 chapters in the book of Proverbs. Read 1 chapter a day for the next 31 days. I read in his autobiography, Billy Graham did that. He read 1 chapter of Proverbs every day. So do that. Get wisdom by seeking God's word that is specifically written for us to teach us how to be wise. The second thing is get discipled. I often wonder about this story, whether or not if the guy in the story had a friend who maybe was meeting with him on a regular basis to mentor him, to disciple him, to have some accountability with him. What if he had someone in his life who knew what his temptations and struggles were and would come alongside with him, would counsel with him, would pray with him? I can't help but believe that would have made a big difference in that young man's whole life, that his entire life would be different from that moment on. One of the questions that I haven't asked recently, but that we always do try to ask, and I ask myself a lot, is who are you discipling and who's discipling you? Who do you have in your life that warns you when you see things happening in your life that maybe could harm you or detour you from a good path? Who really cares about the path that you're walking? Who are you discipling and who's discipling you? Find someone who will disciple you, who will ask you tough questions, and with whom you can tell the truth, and who will help you get through some of those things. Third thing is get the big picture. Make your choices not based on the short term. Make your choices based on the long term. The young man in the story was only worried about what was going to happen to him for over the next 8, 10, 12, 24 hours, maybe 36 hours. He was looking at the short term. He wasn't thinking about the long term. We need to see our life as the way that God sees our life. We need to think about it like a path, a series of steps, not a bunch of unrelated events. Sorry. Siri jumped in there. I don't know how that happened. Think about it. What will happen if you were to commit to a diet and then eat a brownie? What's the next step after you just eat 1 brownie? Think about what will happen if every month you balance your checkbook and you save and you tithe every month. What will your life look like step by step if you do those things every month? Think about what would happen if you pray every morning, if you speak kindly to everyone that you encounter throughout the day. You need to make choices that are based on what will develop if you do something over a long period of time, because that's the path you are going to be on every time you make a one-time decision. Look at this picture on the screen. What are you going to do when you come to this? Yes, that is a fork in the road. Understand, every decision you will make in your life is a fork in the road that will lead you down one path or the other. So which fork will you take? For the next several weeks, I want you to remember this picture and what it's intended to remind you. So I hope this morning you will say this with me. Every decision I make is a new fork in the road. Every decision I make takes me down a new path. Lord, help me to choose the right path. That's the prayer we need to pray. What do you do if you find yourself going down a wrong path? Well, next week we're going to talk about that, and I'll give you a prayer that'll help you head in the right direction. I hope you will be with us for that.